we're here just having a conversation about a paper that Praveena and I wrote last year, and we've invited Anna here to talk with us about it and to talk about her experience.
My name is Fernanda Hierro. I'm the technical secretary at an institution called Consejo, Nuevo, León, which is kind of like a policy think tank directed only to advise the Nuevo León state government. We bring public and private partnership together to do this.
I'm Thrasher, and I am a researcher at the Global Development Policy Center at Boston University.
And I'm Praveena. I'm a senior research associate at the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab, but I was previously with Rachel at the Boston University Global Development Policy Center.
Yeah, so about this article, which is very relevant to the times we're living in, I mean, there must be some barriers regarding industrial policies, particularly green industrial policy, are directed towards reducing the climate change effects. So can you elaborate on which ones they are and how do they work? What did you find?
Yes. So there are potential goals for why countries even deploy a green industrial policy. It could be for diversifying exports, which is a popular one. There's defense reasons. It could be, as you said, for climate change mitigation and adaptation, and overall for economic growth. So those are the potential goals of green industrial policy, or GIP. And then there are the potential barriers. They could be at the multilateral level, they could be at the national level. At the multilateral level, there could be escalating geoeconomic fragmentation, breakdown of multilateralism, which is quite a pertinent issue these days. And then at the national level, there could be limited fiscal space, so countries have a lot of development-related needs for their money to finance, so that could be another potential barrier for why there isn't policy space for green industrial policy. But in our paper, we are going to the multilateral level and looking at trade and investment rules that might potentially be a barrier for implementing green industrial policies.
Well, particularly with that issue in the context of industrial policy, usually emerging economies are blamed for not abiding to trade rules and all these other, institutional frameworks. So, is that what you have found?
Yes and
no.
Yes and no, and maybe yes and yes. Because that we looked at the policy composition, the types of policies that, let's say, advanced countries use and emerging economies use, and there's definitely heterogeneity in the types of policies that they use. So emerging economies do use policies that may go against the trade rules a little bit more, like export bans and local content requirements. But the peculiar thing that we find is that this is not just emerging economy behavior. More and more we find that advanced countries are also using these, quote unquote policies that go against the rules. So that's an important finding, and we really think that it needs to be highlighted, because maybe the rules need to change, maybe the rules need to adapt to changing times, because everybody's trying to do industrial policy and they want to, we want to figure out the best way possible. It's not a blame game, it's about how everybody can do what they need to do.
And I guess it's important to classify which ones should be preserved and which ones should be adapted and which should be thrown away, right? And in that sense, could you elaborate on the methodology you used to get to these results? What did you, how was the research process done?
I can start and Rachel will take over, because she is the trade law person. But we used the Global Trade Alert, which is very commonly used now to look at industrial policy activity across the globe. So we took green industrial policies out of the mix of industrial policies within the Global Trade Alert. How we did that was, we had previously identified certain sectors or product codes. We look at EVs, solar, batteries, critical minerals, and wind. So we pull out the ones that are relevant to those 5 sectors.
And in order to assess whether these policies are consistent or inconsistent with the global rules, which is the relevant, sort of the crux of our question, we had to categorize them. So the policies come in categories such as subsidies, localization rules, and trade rules or trade policies, etc. We looked at the global trade rules. This is a practice that I've undergone a few different times, where we try to see, okay, what do the trade rules say about whether we can increase tariffs? What do the trade rules say about whether we can introduce a local content requirement? What do they say about introducing export restrictions or liberalizing trade? And so we coded the policies as to the extent to which they were consistent or inconsistent with the rules, and came up with some findings which Praveena mentioned earlier, which is that emerging market and developing economies tend to have policies that are more inconsistent with the rules, but that's beginning to change. We're starting to see changing trends.
So what are your main policy recommendations after doing this research?
Yeah, so it's complicated. You know, making policy recommendations is one of the hardest things that I do, and I'm never certain about it. But
nobody is, don't worry.
But there are these tensions, right? There's a tension between what the rules say and what countries are beginning to do. And so you can think about three different ways it could go. Either we could just leave it alone and say, well, they're clearly not following the rules, but they're using the flexibility they have, and maybe it's fine. We just don't worry about it. One is to say they need to change their policy making in order to comply with the rules, because the rules are there for a good reason. But we think that in the context of green industrial policy, there needs to be additional flexibility for experimentation. And so because of the sort of the unique position of these and importance of these policies, it's likely that we need to make some changes to those rules to increase sort of the ability of countries to take those policy actions without the legal risk that would be associated with them.
So it sounds like you've just discovered a new, area of research that needs to expand. So what are the next steps for that? Like, where would you want to take it to?
Yeah, I mean, this is the important question, because we've looked at a global scale and how do we understand what that means really on the ground. And I think country level analysis is the next step. And what we like to see is, what does that look like for a country like Mexico? What does that look like for a country like India? What are their trade policies or trade commitments in comparison with their industrial policies, and how do they individually map? And then we can actually provide more concrete policy recommendations. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yes, because we are talking about country level analysis, so you are in a better position to tell us your experience.
Yeah, well, Nuevo León is one of the main subnational entities in Mexico because we're mainly an industrial state. Mm-hmm. We have the highest GDP per capita in the country, right? And we're the third largest economy in the country. We're right next to the US border, so that has placed us in a position in which our industrial policy has always been the core of our economy, as well as our geographical position makes trade one of our main issues. We're always talking about this, it's always happening. And at the same time, the fact that we are a rich state in Mexico has placed us in a position in which, at least right now, for the last 7 years, federal support towards the state has lowered in terms of funding or investment. So the state has had to come up with new ideas, alternatives, policies, measures to keep its growth going. And so right now, where I work, Consejo, we have been discussing how do we make sure that our state's position in terms of the local and regional economy doesn't lag behind. I mean, productivity has started to go down, and competitiveness has stalled for the past 10 years. What's that got to do with the state? Well, it's due to lack of investment, of course, and the lack of increase in our own capabilities to just be ready for what's coming, We have many of the largest world's companies established in the state, but as we have seen this is not new for anyone, right? But the local content is very low, as well as the jobs that we are using they're not very complex. So we need to be able to take advantage of the fact that these companies are coming and design a way for Nuevo León to be able to provide a more complex alternative and more added value services and goods to whomever wants to come and wants to be there. So we should find a way. It shouldn't be something that we couldn't crack. So that's what we're working on. Yeah.
Right, it's interesting that you mentioned local content because that's one thing that we do find, and we, personally or together, we do believe that there has to be space for, regions to be able to make those policy choices.
Yeah, I think just to sort of wrap up our conversation, I'm hearing that Nuevo León, like many perhaps subnational governments, is needing to put in their own policies in addition to the federal level policies. And those policies may or may not be consistent with those rules.
Yeah.
And frankly, at the subnational government level, you're probably not thinking too much about whether or not the USMCA says this or that about it, although perhaps you are.
Because Nuevo León's economy is 90% dependent on the US. We need to think about both fronts, right?
Yeah. Okay.
How do we keep our connection to the US going and actually very, very active and productive?
Yeah.
And at the same time, how do we build something locally that will resist and actually nurture? We can even nurture our own US trade relationship.
Yeah, someone said something recently, industrial policy is hard. So it's exciting to think about ways we can learn more about industrial policy action and how to remove some of these obstacles to that kind of progress for states like Nuevo León and lots of other places.
No, and thank you for provoking this conversation.
Thanks for joining us.